Texas Gothic, the Grayson curse. Eleanor Mae Grayson seized her daughter-in-law by the collar of her worn robe. Her fingers, thick and bent like old tree roots, dug in with surprising strength. Though her frame was fragile and hunched, her grip had the power of someone shaped by decades in the unforgiving West Texas dust. She pulled Harper in close, so close the younger woman could barely breathe. Eleanor's breath smelled foul, like sulfur from a long-abandoned well. Her face loomed like a dark thunderhead on the prairie, every wrinkle etched deep like dry riverbeds after a storm. Her eyes glinted with something cold and cutting beneath heavy lids. "You'll never be rid of me, girl," Eleanor hissed. Her voice, dry and rough, sliced through the stale air like rusted wire against fabric. Then she pushed Harper back against the chipped formica counter, the edge pressing sharply into her side. Eleanor let out a sharp, brittle laugh, high and eerie, like a blackbird caught in a whirlwind. It was the kind of laugh she saved for moments of cruelty, the kind that lingered in the air long after it stopped. But the joy drained from her just as quickly. Her eyes rolled upward, her pupils clouding over like tarnished coins. Her chest moved, once, twice, and then stilled, the last breath slipping out with a ragged sound. She collapsed into the sagging floral cushions of the couch, her body folding like the pages of a forgotten book. Eleanor Mae Grayson was gone. Across the room, Tucker stood frozen. A faded bandana hung from his hand, hovering just above a laundry basket full of the day's burdens, sweaty shirts, dusty jeans, and socks that smelled like weariness. He had been mid-step when his mother's voice cracked the air like a whip. "Harper, get over here," she had barked, her tone laced with something dark and unspoken, like an old folk charm meant to ward off evil. It shook the walls of the trailer. Tucker didn't hesitate. He dropped the bandana and rushed to her side. He knelt down, cradling her head gently against his chest. Her thinning gray hair spilled like ash over his flannel shirt. "Easy now. It's all settled," he murmured. His eyes met Harper's in the dim, cluttered room. His hand moved slowly, brushing Eleanor's hair with surprising tenderness. Harper's stomach turned. "She's resting now, my poor mama," he said softly. His voice held a sorrowful rasp, like the creak of a screen door in the wind. He began to hum, low and sad, a tune that might once have been sung on a front porch at dusk. Harper watched with a strange mix of feelings. Her throat tightened, not from sadness but from the fierce, unshakable relief rising inside her. The trailer seemed to exhale, its walls loosening after decades of strain. For the woman slumped on the couch like a dethroned queen, her reign had ended. And Harper? She felt no grief. Not a drop. She felt light. She felt free. Eleanor had despised her with a hatred as wide and burning as the Texas plains that stretched forever beyond the trailer park. It had scorched everything in its path, unprovoked, relentless, and rooted in something Harper had never understood. That bitterness had pressed on her like invisible chains. Even now, she could feel it lingering like heat after sundown. She had fallen for Tucker quickly. One glance was enough. She called it love at first sight, and when she said it, her hand would instinctively move to her chest, as though to keep the feeling from escaping. It happened during a barbecue off Route 66. The air smelled of mesquite smoke, and the whine of a steel guitar drifted from a busted radio. Their eyes met over a cooler of not-so-cold beer. His stormy gaze pulled her in like a strong current. 3 months later, they tied the knot at the courthouse in Abilene. It was a no-frills ceremony, a $5 fee and a clerk reading the vows like a grocery list. Harper, 3 years older, worked at a hardware store and lived in a small apartment by the highway. They moved in together, building something fragile but real out of love and stubbornness. At night, the sound of semis rumbling past their window was like a lullaby. Sleep was rare though, the walls were thin, and the road never quiet. Tucker wasn't much for ambition. He was soft and drifty, like clay not yet hardened. He floated through his final semester at West Texas Tech, barely passing. His thoughts rarely wandered beyond the next good laugh or the comfort of a warm bed. He lived in the now, never looking far ahead. But Lord, he was easy on the eyes. That face, sharp and bold. Those deep-set eyes were like a summer storm over the plains. His jawline could rival carved stone. And in their quiet moments together, he was equal parts gentle and wild, a slow-burning fire that left Harper breathless and aching. Other women noticed him too. They gravitated toward him, drawn in by the easy charm and the way he carried himself like a song with a good beat. He knew it, and he used it, sometimes recklessly. Harper never quite understood why she loved him. It felt more like being caught in a wildfire than making a choice. She saw the flaws, the laziness, the drifting, the way he refused to plant roots. She sighed about them often. But forgiveness came naturally, as if it were stitched into her bones. Her family, straightforward folk from Lubbock, with hands shaped by cattle and hard soil, took to Tucker immediately. He had the slow drawl, the tip of the hat, the cowboy charm pulled straight from an old movie reel. He didn't talk much about the future, but he made them laugh, and that was enough. But Eleanor Mae, sitting like a spider at the edge of Odessa in her double-wide trailer, had hated Harper from the start. The first time they met, she looked at her like she was something that had crawled out from under a rock. Tucker never mentioned his father. Maybe he didn't remember, or maybe he'd made peace with not knowing. Eleanor was his sun and shadow, the one fixed point in a life full of shifting ground. She raised him in that rattling trailer, tough as leather, full of fierce love and complicated silence. He had been her whole world. Her little Tuck. Her eyes only softened for one person, and when they met his, something human flickered in them, brief and unfamiliar, like a match struck in the dark. A glimmer of warmth appeared on her otherwise cold and rigid face, a face that rarely bent to kindness. No daughter-in-law could ever compete with that. In Eleanor's world, Tucker stood above all else. She admired him with a devotion so deep it twisted into something that felt unnatural. But Harper? Eleanor never missed a chance to knock her down. She used cruel names, flung with ease and without a trace of regret. Her voice rang out sharp and loud in the tiny trailer kitchen, and each insult echoed in Harper's ears long after the words had stopped. Tucker would give a tired frown and mutter, "Ah, Ma, come on now." But he never scolded her. It wasn't what she said that bothered him, it was just the noise, like static from a radio he'd grown too used to. Harper had done everything she could to earn goodwill. She brought baskets filled with store-bought candles, sweet lotion, and pecan pralines in clear wrapping. She smoked brisket over pecan wood until it pulled apart with a fork. She worked through the heat to repair Eleanor's trailer, patching the roof with tar paper, fixing the screen door that slammed in the wind, hauling trash to the dump until her shirt stuck to her skin with sweat. Not once did Eleanor acknowledge it. No thanks. No hint of appreciation in those watchful eyes that followed Harper like a hawk, waiting for the slightest slip, the smallest excuse to pounce. Eleanor's glare carried weight. Her thick brows sat low like storm fronts, and her eyes sparkled beneath their shadows with something colder than disapproval. Her jaw held tight, jutting forward in judgment. It felt as though something wild and bitter lived just beneath her skin, clawing its way out with every breath. Eleanor was like a storm bottled in old bones. Her body creaked when she moved, stiff and stubborn, like an aging relic that refused to break. She looked 72 but wore the years like they were bricks stacked on her shoulders. Her skin hung in folds, dried by the sun and time. Her bones, sharp beneath the surface, seemed fragile as twigs, but she moved with calculated control. Harper often wondered where the truth ended and performance began. Eleanor clung to the role of the unwell matriarch like an actress who had rehearsed the same scene for decades. Every groan, every breathless sigh was a tool. Every cough and complaint was a way to command the space. In her final year, she turned the trailer into her throne room and ran it like a general on edge. "This coffee's cold." "No, now it's too hot." "What is this, a drop?" "You stingy little thing, can't even spare enough for someone who's struggling," she would bark, her voice slicing through the air like wire. She could change moods on a dime. One moment she was weak, asking for help with trembling hands. The next, she was full of vinegar and fire, snapping orders like she'd never known weakness. She made Harper take time off from the hardware store, not with orders but with guilt. "I'll be alone all day. Something might happen. Her voice quivered just enough to get under Harper's skin. In the end, Harper gave in, again and again. She lost pay, lost time, and lost pieces of herself she couldn't name. That last year blurred into one long stretch of exhaustion, full of tension and frayed nerves. Harper lived like someone under constant inspection, walking a tightrope through someone else's domain. Eleanor's voice never stopped. Morning to night, she filled the trailer with noise. Demands, complaints, sharp commentary, all delivered in a tone that could peel paint off the walls. Her words stung, even when they weren't meant to. They circled Harper like a dust storm, wearing her down one gust at a time. Harper said nothing. She just endured. She watched over Eleanor the way a sentry might watch over an unpredictable storm cloud, always prepared for the next flash. She tried to stay one step ahead, hoping to avoid the next complaint, the next accusation. Eleanor demanded that every door stay open, even the one to the bathroom. She said she couldn't hear what was going on if things were shut. Her cough echoed through the thin walls at night, bouncing off the furniture, loud enough to make rest impossible. She coughed like she was reminding them she was still in control. Her presence stretched into every corner of the trailer, even into their bedroom. Her judgment, though unspoken, sat heavy on the sheets. Harper could feel it in her spine. Tucker, however, didn't seem to notice or didn't care. His attention stayed fixed on her, even as the walls seemed to listen. His hands knew where to go, and his touch reminded her of safety, of belonging. But for Harper, the atmosphere was always tight, as if the air thickened with disapproval. Her breaths were short. Her movements cautious. Each creak of the floor felt like a warning. She flinched at the sound of Eleanor's voice, always expecting it. Sometimes, just when things felt quiet, that voice would rise again from the far end of the trailer. "Milk with honey, now," she'd call out, loud and expectant. "Unless you want me to just wither here." And even when Harper brought it, Eleanor would complain. Too hot. Too cold. Not sweet enough. Too sweet. The complaints never ended. The air in the trailer grew thick, not just from the heat but from the weight of Eleanor's discontent. Her words had a way of painting vivid, unsettling images, even when she was talking about ordinary things. One night, Harper was returning from the kitchen when Eleanor muttered from her chair, "Those alley cats are keeping me up. I ought to give them a reason to stay away." Her voice was low, gravelly, like wind dragging stones across the desert floor. There was no smile in her tone, just that harsh edge Harper had come to know too well. It made Harper's skin crawl. Her mind filled with pictures she didn't want. Even in moments that were supposed to feel close and warm, the old woman's presence crept in, souring everything. Tucker never flinched. He stayed calm, as if the trailer were silent, as if none of it touched him. But Harper felt every shift, every breath. Fear ran through her like a slow chill. She didn't speak. She hardly moved. She felt like a ghost in her own home. And then, one morning, it all went quiet. Eleanor didn't call out. No coughing. No creaking from the old recliner. Just stillness. Harper stood frozen in the hallway, listening to the silence. It felt unnatural, too wide, too deep. Something had changed. Later, when the silence settled into the trailer like dust on forgotten shelves, Harper felt something she hadn't known in years: lightness. Not happiness, not relief. Just the absence of weight. A stillness that didn't ask for anything. But even that, she feared, would not last. Eleanor had always known how to leave a mark without raising her voice. It wasn't over. Not yet. Not really. Even in her absence, Eleanor's presence stretched across their lives like a long shadow, unmoved by time or grief. The farewell was quiet, almost like a secret the wind carried away before anyone could truly witness it. It happened on the edge of Odessa, where the land was dry and the horizon looked like it might crumble under the weight of the sun. The wind stirred the scent of dust and machinery, and the sky stretched on forever, pale and empty. Only 5 people came. A preacher with a worn Bible spoke with little emotion. 2 workers leaned on their shovels, looking more interested in the weather than the words. Harper and Tucker stood apart. The space between them wasn't wide, but it felt impossible to cross. They shared history, but not comfort. Grief hung in the air, thick and awkward. It clung to Tucker like dust to denim, but Harper didn't feel it. She stood with her hands deep in her coat pockets, watching the simple wooden box as it was lowered. The casket looked hastily made, its corners rough, its finish uneven, like it belonged to someone no one had time to honor. Stories swirled in the town like tumbleweeds. People said Eleanor was strange, whispered things about full moons and strange disappearances. Some claimed she had vanished into the Pecos wilderness once and returned changed. The area was feared, filled with twisted trees and air that buzzed with old secrets. Most folks didn't go there unless they had to. Tucker shed quiet tears beside the open earth. The wind caught them before they reached his chin. His broad shoulders shook once, and then again, as if trying to contain something too big to name. Harper didn't move. She watched, steady and silent. The dirt beneath her boots felt alive somehow, like even the ground was eager to move on and forget. The preacher finished his brief message, closing his book with a soft snap. One by one, they each stepped forward. Dry dirt clumped in their hands, crumbling as they let it fall. The sound it made on the wooden surface below was louder than expected, sharp, final, scattered like distant footsteps. The workmen placed a cross and a wreath on the mound. Harper had bought them at a roadside stand for $10, plastic flowers bent from the heat, their colors already fading. The workers wiped their foreheads and walked away without speaking. The sky above stretched blank and bright. Harper didn't cry. She didn't feel like she needed to. She just stared, her expression unreadable, her body still. The trailer back home waited, quiet for once. No voice barking orders, no slamming screen door, no creak of the recliner shifting under weight. Just space. Just stillness. And that silence greeted her when she returned. The apartment off the highway had never felt so still. She closed the door, kicked off her shoes, and stood in the middle of the living room like someone unsure of what came next. She turned on the radio. An old country song drifted through the room, warm and nostalgic. She didn't know the singer's name, but the voice felt like an old friend. She walked barefoot across the carpet, toes brushing soft threads. The couch was empty now. She had thrown a loud floral blanket over it, something she found at a flea market on a whim. Its bright colors clashed with the beige room in a way that made her smile. Pink and yellow flowers bloomed where cold silence once lived. The trailer had lost its weight. The shadows had thinned. For a moment, she thought maybe it was finally over. She stood near the sofa, arms folded, staring at the strange burst of color the blanket brought to the room. It didn't match anything else, and maybe that was the point. It was bold, loud, everything Eleanor hadn't been in her final months. Harper breathed in deeply. The air didn't smell like menthol rub or stale coffee anymore. It was just air. She walked to the small side table beside the couch. On it sat a photo frame, a cheap one with plastic edging that had started to peel. Inside was a picture she didn't remember taking. She leaned closer, brows furrowing. In the photo, Eleanor was stretched out on the same sofa, her face twisted into that familiar scowl. She looked straight at the camera, her eyes narrowed, lips tight. But that wasn't the part that made Harper's skin prickle. It was the rest of the image. Tucker stood behind the sofa, looking down at Eleanor with an expression Harper couldn't quite read. He looked calm, maybe even peaceful, his hands resting on the back cushion. But what chilled her was her own reflection in the scene, kneeling at the foot of the couch, hands clasped like someone in prayer, eyes cast downward. "I never did that," she whispered. She picked up the frame and studied it closer. The image was grainy, slightly faded, but unmistakable. Her heart began to race. Her palms felt suddenly cold. She had never knelt in front of Eleanor. Not once. Not even in jest. And if she and Tucker were both in the frame, who had taken the picture? She stared at it longer, her thoughts turning over themselves. Something about the photo didn't make sense. Something felt wrong, like a song with the wrong chord hidden in the middle. She traced the curve of the roofline with her eyes, starting at the window where the blinds hung askew and dust clung to every slat. "When did he sneak this in?" she whispered, her voice touched by genuine surprise. She meant Tucker. "That frame's not cheap. He can't even remember bread unless it's written down. And flowers, too?" 6 blossoms stood in a chipped vase, 4 daisies and 2 cornflowers, somehow bright and fresh despite the season. October wasn't kind to such delicate things. The vase, dark and weathered, pulled something from her memory. Its slim neck and worn edge reminded her of a corner in Eleanor's trailer. The spot under the faded images of saints, or maybe old family portraits, where forgotten faces once looked out from under a dusty cloth. That memory returned uninvited, bringing with it a tight twist in Harper's stomach. She set the photo frame back on the table, fingers hesitating on the cool glass. The image inside seemed to burn into her mind. This wasn't just a photograph. It felt like something more. A message, maybe. A warning. The frame mocked her with its presence, like a whisper that refused to be ignored. Harper froze for a second. Her hand hovered, then she let the frame fall to the table. The sound it made was soft, but final. It would not stay propped up. It smelled of something old, like regret and something unspoken. She turned away and walked into the kitchen. The familiar hum of the coffee maker grounded her. She focused on the gentle bubbling, the drip of warm liquid into the pot. Eleanor's presence still clung to the air like smoke that refused to fade, curling into her thoughts and clouding everything she tried to clear. Outside, the city of Abilene shimmered in muted gray. The highway hummed faintly, pulling her mind back through everything she thought she had left behind. A sudden crash broke the calm. Sharp and quick, it came from the living room, cutting through the quiet like shattered glass. Harper's mug trembled in her hand. She froze, heart skipping a beat. The television fell silent, its glow gone in an instant. What followed was a stillness so heavy it felt unnatural. "I'll never leave you," the voice echoed inside her. It was Eleanor's tone, sharp, angry, and unyielding, etched into memory like a groove in a record. Harper clenched her jaw. "You stubborn old ghost," she muttered under her breath, defiance rising in her throat. The silence pushed in from all sides. Her fingers curled around the nearest thing, an old kitchen knife, dull and rarely used. She held it tight, not for defense but for comfort. Its weight grounded her. She moved cautiously toward the living room, eyes scanning the shadows. The blade was no weapon, just a piece of metal between her and the unknown. The room was empty. Nothing moved. Yet the air felt strange, too still, too thick. Light from the window seemed dimmer, as though the day had shifted into something less welcoming. Her steps slowed as she neared the sofa. It sat open, pulled out into a bed she hadn't touched. The floral blanket was gone. In its place lay a faded gray sheet, worn thin and frayed at the edges. She stared at it, breathing shallowly. The sheet reminded her of moments she'd tried to forget. Then she saw it, the photograph, standing upright again on the table. She hadn't touched it. But there it was. Eleanor's gaze locked onto hers, sharp and intense. It was the kind of look that seemed to see everything, and forgive nothing. Harper stood still, staring into that frozen gaze. It felt like being pulled under a wave she couldn't fight. In her mind, memories stirred, half-formed, distorted. She blinked, and suddenly she was no longer just standing there. She was kneeling. In her mind's eye, she saw herself on the floor, forehead nearly to the ground, arms limp at her sides. And there, Eleanor, towering above her, a bony foot resting on Harper's shoulder like a symbol of control. It didn't make sense. It couldn't have happened. But the image felt so vivid, so real, it wrapped around her chest like a tightening cord. A heat surged through her, raw and blinding. Her hands moved without thinking. She grabbed the photo frame and hurled it toward the couch. It struck the cushions, bounced, and slid into the narrow space beside the wall. A sharp sound followed, glass cracking. Harper exhaled hard, chest heaving. Enough, she spat through clenched teeth. She ripped the sheet off the sofa with sudden force. Her arms shook as she tore it down the middle. The fabric shredded easily, releasing a soft hiss as threads gave way. She scattered the pieces across the room like dry leaves in the wind. "You're gone," she said loudly, voice ragged. "Do you hear me? You're not here anymore." The television blinked back to life. Its screen glowed with cold light. A sound poured out, static, thick and hissing. Then it changed. The noise became layered, almost melodic, like wind echoing through pipes. Shapes moved across the screen, chaotic and shifting. Then a face began to take form. Blurry at first, then clearer. Too clear. The face on the screen twisted slowly into focus. Its features stretched unnaturally, mouth curling too wide, eyes unblinking. The chin slipped sideways, like a puppet with loosened strings. Harper's breath caught in her throat. The image was unmistakable. It was Eleanor, but not as she had been in life. This version looked like a reflection warped by water, familiar but wrong. That smile, it wasn't one of joy. It was the kind of expression that lived somewhere between anger and satisfaction, full of knowing. Harper couldn't look away. Her hands trembled. The dull knife she still held felt utterly useless against what she was seeing. It might as well have been a spoon. The sound changed again. The static gave way to a low, rising wail, deep and vibrating, as if the air itself were crying. It climbed higher, twisting into a pitch that pressed into Harper's skull. She winced, covering her ears. The knife slipped from her grasp and hit the floor with a muted clatter. She reached for the remote, pressing buttons frantically. Nothing changed. The sound only grew louder, becoming unbearable. On the screen, Eleanor's eyes seemed to swell, her pupils overtaking the whites, as though the image were about to burst. Her face warped further, no longer human, not entirely. The grin grew, pushed into an impossible shape, jawline stretching beyond its limits. Harper stumbled backward, her feet dragging against the carpet. She lunged toward the wall and pulled the power cord from the outlet. The screen died instantly, fading into black with a single sharp flicker. But the sound, it lingered. A faint echo, high and eerie, remained in the air, even after the screen went dark. The room dimmed as if the daylight itself had grown tired. The shadows along the edges seemed to lean in, thick and watchful. Harper blinked hard, trying to reset the world around her. For a second, she thought the room had returned to normal. But as her vision adjusted, she noticed the changes. The walls weren't the soft beige of her apartment anymore. They were peeling, stained with streaks of gray and patches of something darker. Dust clung to every surface, and in the corners, faint traces of mold curled like dried ink on old paper. The carpet beneath her feet felt damp and uneven, as though the floorboards had shifted and rotted beneath her without warning. The couch remained in place, its form unchanged. But the gray sheet now lay perfectly flat, unwrinkled, untouched, like a stage waiting for its final act. The silence pressed in again, heavier than before. The air held the weight of memory, dense and unmoving, like the stillness after a storm. This wasn't her apartment. She knew that now. She was back in Eleanor's trailer. Not the one she remembered from a year ago, but something twisted, something drawn from the past and remade in shadow. The smells were familiar: dust, stale air, something faintly bitter like dried herbs. Her heart pounded in her chest as she turned in place, taking in the space. The trailer was silent, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like it was watching. She stepped forward, and the floor creaked in a way that made her stop. The sound was too clear, too deliberate. Like a reply. Her name whispered from the walls. Not loud, not spoken aloud, but they're all the same. A scratchy echo, carried in the same gravelly tone Harper had heard so many times. Eleanor's voice. Distant, but close enough to feel. She wasn't alone. The kitchen door opened slowly, creaking on its hinges with a sound like something ancient being disturbed. It groaned low and deep, the kind of sound that made the hair on Harper's arms rise. Then came a heavy, rhythmic thudding, sharp and wet, like something being chopped in half. It echoed through the silence. The sound was unmistakable to her. It reminded her of Eleanor in the kitchen, working with practiced aggression, preparing her infamous meals with a cleaver and too much anger. Harper used to sit at the edge of the table, pretending to enjoy them, greasy cuts, sizzling and dense with smoke, while under the old woman's stare that felt like judgment dressed as hospitality. Now, hearing the sound again, Harper's stomach twisted. She felt the past flood back. And then the noise stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound itself, like something had entered the room and was watching without a breath. She heard footsteps, slow, dragging, steady. They creaked across the floor with the weight of memory. Each one made her chest tighten. The sound seemed to draw closer, not just in space, but in time, dragging pieces of the past behind it. Her limbs froze. A chill passed through her, and everything inside her went quiet. She dropped to the floor and folded into herself, arms wrapping around her head. The air thickened. It felt like the walls themselves were leaning closer. Paint peeled in her imagination, curling off the surfaces like skin from heat, and the shadows deepened around her. She couldn't run. She couldn't scream. She could only wait, trapped in a moment that felt too familiar. The sound of something breathing near her ear made her eyes clench shut. Then, from above, a voice broke the air. "What are you doing?" Tucker's voice cut through the tension like a cold breeze through a heavy room. It was casual, almost indifferent, like someone commenting on the weather. Harper's eyes snapped open. He stood over her, one hand on her shoulder, his expression unreadable. The familiar scent of motor oil and something sharp clung to his flannel shirt. She sprang up and pressed herself into his chest, sobbing quietly. Her tears soaked into his collar, but he didn't hold her. He stepped back with a grunt and slipped on his slippers like it was just another evening. His detachment stung more than anything. Harper wiped at her eyes, trying to make sense of what was real and what wasn't. The apartment looked perfectly normal again, clean, still, untouched by anything unusual. The air was dry and quiet. The furniture stood exactly where it should. But Harper was shaking, still caught in the wake of something she couldn't name. She glanced at the clock. 2:30. She had made coffee at 7. Time had slipped from her hands like water. "Dinner?" Tucker called from the kitchen, his tone flat. No concern, no questions. Just hunger and routine. Harper nodded automatically, her throat raw as she whispered, "Coming." She moved toward the stove, her hands unsure. Her mind echoed with fragmented thoughts. Had any of it been real? A trick of stress and grief? "They didn't let me hold a service," Tucker muttered behind her, yanking the fridge open. No memorial. No blessing. Nothing. Then his hand slammed the table. Harper flinched. The sudden burst of sound cracked the air like lightning. She stumbled back, pulse quickening, trying to read his face. But something about him felt unfamiliar, off-center, unsteady, different. "I asked why not," Tucker muttered, his eyes locked on the table. "They said she wasn't registered with the church. No records. No baptism. Nothing." His voice grew sharper with each word, like a blade scraping stone. Harper didn't answer. She could feel the tension gathering like a thunderstorm. He turned toward her, and for a moment, the warmth she once knew in his face was gone. Replaced by something brittle, something shadowed. His voice dropped lower. "They acted like she didn't matter." Harper quietly turned on the stove, placing a pan down with shaking hands. She began heating leftovers, focusing on small, simple tasks. Anything to stay anchored. His gaze never left her. She could feel it on the back of her neck, pressing, unrelenting, like sunlight through glass on a sweltering day. Tucker didn't say another word. He sat down and stared at the wall, shoulders tense, eyes distant. Harper kept her distance. Even in silence, his presence felt heavy. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, but loaded, like something waiting to be triggered. Later, as the afternoon dragged on, she asked him gently to help fold the sofa. He didn't answer. He waved her off without looking and collapsed onto it. Seconds later, he was snoring, deep and fast. Harper stared at him for a long time. Something about the way he slept felt too sudden, too empty. She tugged at the sofa herself. It barely moved, stiff and resistant. It felt less like a piece of furniture and more like something rooted to the floor. Exhausted, she sank into it. The gray sheet was still there, unwrinkled and undisturbed. Sweat gathered at her hairline. Something about the photo still nagged at her, like a forgotten tune she couldn't place. The unease wouldn't leave her. She stood up slowly and moved the sofa aside, careful not to wake Tucker. Her hands brushed against the wall where the photograph had landed earlier, but there was nothing there now, just dust and faded paint. No broken frame. No glass. No sharp gaze staring back at her. Only silence. It felt unreal, but she was grateful for it. A fragile peace settled over her, though she didn't trust it. The kind of quiet that followed after something loud. The kind that made her wonder if the noise would return. She turned toward the window. The sun was beginning to set, spilling amber light across the room like paint. Rust-colored shadows crept along the floor and walls, soft and surreal. A faint breeze stirred the blinds, and for a moment, everything felt still, almost too still. Tucker snored in the other room, the sound deep and uneven. It felt distant, like it belonged in another world. Harper watched the way the light shifted, casting long shapes across the furniture. It reminded her of an old horror movie, the kind with flickering lamps and shadows that moved wrong. Except this wasn't a film. This was her life. She told herself it had just been exhaustion. A vivid hallucination. Her mind, fried from grief and stress, had played tricks on her. She clung to that thought like a life raft. But when Tucker returned in the morning, something about him had changed. His face was pale, his skin uneven, and his eyes, once lively and curious, were flat, like polished stone. He sat at the table in silence, then said, "You never liked her." His voice had changed, too. It filled the room differently. And when he looked at her, it wasn't with love. It was with accusation. Harper didn't answer. Her throat felt tight, and the words she might have said stayed buried. She knew the truth wouldn't help. Denial would only make things worse. Tucker leaned forward, his elbows on the table, eyes locked on her. His presence filled the kitchen like a pressure system before a storm. "You wanted her gone," he said, voice quiet but sharp. "I heard you." Whispering it. Over and over. The accusation made her stomach twist. It wasn't true, but somehow, the way he said it made it feel real. As if the words themselves had come alive and settled into the space between them. Harper took a slow step back. The room suddenly felt smaller. She moved toward the stove, trying to hide the shaking in her hands. She cracked 2 eggs into a skillet, the sizzle filling the silence like static. It gave her something to focus on. Something normal. Tucker didn't move. He just watched. The way his eyes followed her made her feel like she was standing in the path of something she couldn't see. His silence was louder than any shout. Then, without warning, he reached for something on the counter and tossed it toward the floor. A butter knife clattered against the tile, loud in the quiet space. Harper jumped at the sound. Tucker stood abruptly, muttering something she couldn't understand. His steps echoed as he left the room. She sat down slowly, hands pressed to her ears, trying to block out the fading noise. The kitchen darkened around her as evening fell. She sat there until his voice returned, soft and strange, "Sweetheart, where are you?" His shape filled the doorway. She couldn't speak. He stepped forward and touched her face gently, then reached for her hand. "Let's honor Mama," he whispered, and led her into the dark. A mound had taken over the living room, an unsettling sculpture of clothes, broken furniture, and bits of forgotten life. It reached Harper's waist, crowned by a cracked mirror and a worn doll missing most of its body. Candles circled the mess, their flames standing impossibly still. The air should have stirred them, but nothing moved. Tucker knelt before the heap, his expression somewhere between devotion and madness. His smile was wide, stretched far beyond comfort. "Come on," he whispered, his voice smooth but layered with something Harper couldn't name. She lowered herself slowly, knees pressing into the carpet. His hand shot out and pulled her closer, fingers digging into her shoulders, not rough, but insistent. Her breath hitched. The contact left a burn she couldn't explain. "You don't want to miss this," he said, eyes flickering with strange excitement. Then, without looking at her, he bent forward. His chest touched the floor, and his hands rose above his head as if in prayer. Harper watched in disbelief. The room pulsed with a pressure that wasn't coming from anything she could see. The candles shimmered, casting strange reflections on the mirror's fractured surface. Harper felt boxed in, held captive by light and shadow. Her heart pounded. Tucker began to speak in a language she didn't recognize, soft syllables that didn't belong in this world. "Gosh, Conas Palin et bendicardos," he intoned, over and over. His voice deepened, distant. He moved his hands in the air, tracing invisible symbols. The motions mimicked something sacred but felt wrong, like a forgotten hymn sung out of key. Harper trembled beside him, her breathing shallow. She felt like a bystander in someone else's dream, or nightmare. A tear slid down her cheek as the candle flames flared white. Tucker's hands hovered over the doll as if it were sacred. His fingers trembled, then stilled. The room seemed to respond, thickening with some presence Harper couldn't name. The mirror behind him reflected shadows that didn't match anything in the room. He turned to Harper with shining eyes, not of joy, but of something deeper, something boundless and consuming. "It's done," he said softly. Then he reached for her hand and pressed his palm to hers. His skin felt cold, like it hadn't touched warmth in a long time. "There," he whispered. "We're joined now." She tried to pull back, but he held her fingers tightly. Not with force, but with conviction. He wasn't hurting her, not physically, but it felt like something invisible had latched onto her. Her vision blurred. The candlelight bent at the corners of her eyes. "Stay still," he breathed, voice slow, thick. "This is for her." His face tilted toward the doll. He bowed deeply again, muttering the same strange chant. The doll, once still, now sat at the center of it all, a focus point of his energy. He placed his forehead against the floor. "Thank you, Mama," he whispered, his voice suddenly choked with emotion. Then the doll vanished. One moment it was there. The next, it was gone. Only the mirror remained, now smudged with something dark. Harper stared, mouth open. She hadn't blinked, but it had disappeared all the same. Tucker rose slowly, face calm. "She heard me," he said. "She always listens." That night, Harper lay beside him in bed. The silence was unnatural. His breathing was even, peaceful, like nothing had happened. But she couldn't close her eyes. Her body felt like it no longer belonged to her. The sheets were cold, and his nearness made her feel smaller than ever. Harper lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. The fan spun slowly above them, casting soft shadows like turning blades. Tucker slept beside her, motionless but loud, his snores rising and falling like waves hitting a distant shore. She listened to each sound, unable to rest. Her thoughts spun faster than the fan, looping through the events of the day. The altar. The chant. The doll. She rolled to her side, pulling the blanket tighter. His warmth behind her no longer brought comfort. It felt invasive, like a storm cloud pressing close. Her skin crawled with every inch of distance he didn't keep. The bed, once shared in love, now felt more like a hollowed crypt. She closed her eyes, but her thoughts screamed behind them. Her breath stayed shallow. Sleep never came. When she did finally drift off, it was like sinking into ice water. And when she woke, it was sudden. Tucker stood over her, already dressed, watching her closely. She sat up, blinking at the pale light coming through the curtains. "You slept long," he said flatly, his eyes flicking toward the wall. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. He turned and walked out of the room, his bare feet silent on the floorboards. Harper sat there, unmoving. Later, in the kitchen, she reached for her coffee but found only silence. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't eaten. She didn't want to. Still, she forced herself to chew a piece of toast, but the taste turned bitter in her mouth. Tucker sat at the table, staring at her. "You always hated her food," he said suddenly. His tone was mild, but something behind it scraped like sandpaper. Harper froze, the toast halfway to her lips. She hadn't said anything. Not out loud. She set the toast down and pushed the plate away. Her stomach churned. The silence between them expanded, filling the kitchen like fog. Tucker kept his gaze on her, unblinking, as if searching for something behind her eyes. He sipped from a chipped mug, his expression unreadable. Harper stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. "I think I need to get out. Just for a bit," she said quietly. He didn't answer right away. Then, with a flat voice, he replied, "An hour. No more." She nodded. It felt like receiving permission instead of sharing a thought. That day, she wandered the streets, barely noticing where her feet took her. Her mind was elsewhere, trapped in images and echoes. She passed the same buildings, the same empty sidewalks. Her reflection in a shop window startled her, drawn, pale, unfamiliar. When she returned, Tucker was at the stove, humming something tuneless. A pot simmered, and the smell was sharp and unpleasant. He turned to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're just in time." She sat stiffly at the table, and he served her something gray and soft. She lifted her fork, but it shook in her hand. "I'm not hungry," she said. "You need to eat," he replied, placing his hand over hers, not gentle, not forceful, just heavy. She didn't pull away. She didn't want to see what would happen if she did. His grip lingered. With every bite she took, his hand pressed a little firmer. Not enough to bruise, but enough to remind her she wasn't alone in the room. Not truly. Afterward, she sat in the living room while Tucker washed dishes behind her, whistling. Each high note felt like it might shatter the quiet she was trying to build inside herself. That night, Harper stood at the bedroom doorway, staring into the darkened space. Tucker was already asleep on the bed, one leg hanging off the edge, his breathing loud and even. She didn't move for a long time. The light from the hallway cut across the floor, casting a thin beam toward the far wall. The silence around her wasn't comforting. It was alert, like the house itself was listening. She stepped into the room, the floor creaking beneath her bare feet. Her body felt like it was made of glass, fragile, cold, ready to crack with the slightest wrong word or move. She lay down carefully, keeping her back to him. Sleep didn't come. Her mind wandered to the altar, to the doll, to the way Tucker's eyes had changed. Everything about him felt off. Like something had slipped into him through a door that should have stayed closed. The next morning, he sat at the kitchen table with folded hands and a quiet smile. "I thought about it all night," he said, not looking up. "She still needs you." Harper didn't ask who. She knew. "I'll take care of the rest," he added, sipping from his mug. "You don't need to worry about anything. Just be here." She nodded slowly, her hands gripping the back of the chair. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "What about work?" He shrugged. "It's not important. You're needed here." She stared at him. "Can I go outside?" He smiled, faint and cold. "1 hour a day. That's fair." She sat down across from him, her chair making a soft thump against the floor. The kitchen filled with light from the window. Dust floated through the beams like snow. But Harper felt no warmth. Only distance.